Dorje Janje Delo Naroda Marba Mela Juje Gambo Adeza Yeza Ganje Gamaba Jeye Janje Jubanzananda Rada Zaza Bardin Robazo Sola Zaja Jilanganime
Nyame
Roda Voga Jula Zorwan de Zoga Jula Manam Jiban Zeno Namda Zenjela Shelo Ganje Gavara Zambayin Emenya Gala Chajime Badan Duda Jube Ganjela Nyinga Jemba Meba Zenjela Mugamjengo Zambayin Menga Dergo Jebela Mala Janda Zorwan de Beganjela Jime Muge Jewa Zenjela
Yang me
Ganjeng Zambayin Kanjara Dobe Ngobo Zomade Maje de Ganjobe Ganjela Gonzalo Dan Rava Zenjela Namdong Owo Juga Zambayin Jeya Mayin Jeya Javala Mangaro Banjarve Ganjela Gande Yeme Doba Zenjela Jeva Ganda Yanda Lama
Rame
Jude Bala Lon Judeng Sadalam Jyonde Razone Dorje Jange Gomba Nyordo Yo Barne Zava Lama Ramboje Dage Jora Bime Diyon Karen Jimbo Gone Jizong Yen Kosong Dojeng Roza De Zo Min Juje Yenje Borana De Zo Zanje Gunjeng Oni Razen Juga Ngazon Donze Be Zava Lama Yavla Zorwan De Zanje Gung Zava Lama La Gozong Gaba Jimbo Zorwan Domine Lo Rangon Draba Dan Zende Draba Nyambara Zenje Lo Voilà, ça tenait un terrain. Sudo, ta chudron namba thamji la. Ningon dele kyata. Te talin da. Namka da nyambe simji tamji. Tende la na me bayan daba zobo sanji ju kompa rumbo chi tobrasa. Te chi da dagi tari tambi chu samu kangi tsur yendo sini nyamsa lawa jawo nyambe konho sancho chodo thukji bada chu simbe kumji da denba kone sin tsar. Tela kangi simbar sawe chuje ramba ne tanga so jarwa ki deni samla mandu pa kanya yo mari ti khonso topa ki churi te nane chando dangi do niga goni xie du tena nga so chando ga goni xie ko liri then the ta Chando go goni ju the tang korwa ka nga so ngim jong go goni hi ngim jong ser ya de goni khabjang ti to ni hi de ta lo do number ye nga so ma hyo ko le ri ta nga so then the ta ta na hyo pa te la de nga so 담절 니버가 트데 강탑토 휴스반다오 다 던르케리 데데 다다당아 저 인공가 잡니 데니 쳔마다바 트데 강탑토 저 휴야다 데니 가저 조송나 디지니 두추 양당자토나 당 저와텔린다 도자웨나 야본도 참마가 저와트니 고유 세파리 땡아랑 저와텔린다 나나 데니 카토 가리고니파 효과도 나온다고 대사를 래 라간도 효시나 마히나 가려요 된도 됐는데.
Good afternoon, my Dharma friends. Please generate your motivation for listening to the teachings as bodhicitta, the thought that all beings throughout space must achieve perfect and unsurpassable Buddhahood, and that it is in order to bring that about that you are listening to and practicing the profound and holy Dharma. We saw this morning that the Buddha's teachings can be divided into indicative statements and definitive statements, and that of these, what we are concerned with this weekend is a part of the indicative meaning, including indicative statements. Specifically, we are concerned with the four thoughts that turn the mind toward the determination to be free. This morning, I explained as best I could the difficulty of acquisition of the freedom and resources that comprise this precious human existence. And now, this afternoon, I'm going to continue by explaining as best I can the second of the four contemplations, which is impermanence. If time permits, at the end of this session, we will also have questions and answers. And again, I will do my best to answer your questions when I can.
Olas. Teri ta tamjor ni kawate chipo kanga son dansan toko mare. Tamjor ni kawate chipo re ai ta tamjor rumboche tamjor ji mulu rumboche seriate. Hyandane ja ni kawa komba tedrike rumboche zo main ta goya ge jimse ke hale ba ke rindo samne ngi hir ni chardu ta ngi hir ni gorwa nga zo chu kare domne ngi hi semnani 소속이 희르니 거로 담마게 히 대바참 마인바 담보 히에콜레 투바조레 투삼 검섬정아 손 로고레 투삼 검섬 야 마다바토니 산지기 추티 냠니 시고레 예나 투바 찍보근 당사 토고 마레 마르기 직제나 텐레 영크레 삼 삼베 띵라밤네 소속 때 린도도 문도다네 협차는 삼노다네 니히 소속 처니고 레마도 산지기 추서야데 셈나니 소속 니히 처니도네 산지 코난가 텐르 니니 저리 땡아서 세티니 나라서 땡아란서 랑니 걸마도 제게 따버 머르라 잠네 휴디나 저케요 마리 땡디 추야보히 드마히바다리 따방아서 잠네르 현도사유나 효도 골리레 리총나데 추야보히 남다히 남버 타바히 드마히바리 에나 잠네 가서 잠네 공조 섬저 효고레데 타통다오텔라 소소가 니히레 땡소바리 니인도 다니다게 공연 송어와 다니다게 공연 다니다게 자야연소 나랑 공원데 나랑 잠내 교사데 나랑 하고 타바히게 드르히게 삼노 땅 타고를 마도 제게 저거 말이 대인도 다 담저 니가와데 현드네자 공바 옆에 장섬적고네 장 망보경 가서 랍차바리 다대 지보근 당사 도고 말이 다 대니 마다바리 니어든 정도야 그 지진이 두제 탐지 마다바 송원들어 다 따와가다 사제 예는 두제 탐지 마다바리 네버게 요 용수 줘봐도 마다바리 맞아 따봐도 땜바 요 말이 대도 마다바인데 ngaso send no more longer taba ye che chorwe jam mataba so ngaso long sip la manme ya ya ba na ye ngaso go lupon de read or long sip la manme ya ba na ye te na da ro ko chi mare long hyok chen bo jang do go manme na da ro chi mare da la ka ngaso de or o te ndu te ni te la mataba te la yang gomsan drama da mambo xie ko re sabjin drama da yo da mambo re ta jen ru da na nga zo ge sen nu jin jik tin la sam na mata pa na kyu ji sim jin la sam na mata pa dam pe ji bu la sam na mata pa te na ye ge dam ba tram bo la sam na mata pa je ge da bo la sam na mata pa pe do na zo la sam na mata pa 치치 니바스 사는 마다발라서 마다발라 삽진 나바로 마마보 요거리 얘나야 가서 다 강라 강산 사는 땅 거로서 빼리 빼데 빼다 빼진이 거 저저거 빼텔라 되는 빼지 간도 적거다 따는다 너나 빼지보게 난사 토고 말이 대인도 빼야 너나 example 나오든 가서 요거로 대리 당보다 가서 선후진 직진라 사는 마다발라 삼노 땅야나 다 창만 마다바인도 Tendula samno tane remji renji jangoro lo jang zo nga so the lo jong ro the lo jong seria de pe ha le ba ya bo re da ta te chu se ya de sanje ge chu re ha le ba anyo yong ma na nga de ta de po go kendra na nga ge na gi cha de ore su ya ban ro ore dia ka danzen jong ko ro nga so do na danzen jong ko ro 다소 참아 강아서라 때자래 샘때라 베 핀토 자침보 용거로 데 샘토데 샘때라 핀토 용네 되는 가서 그 추냠서 링고들 샘 사제 그 추데 샘토네 링고데 데리 되니 답 가서 너나 빼도 나서 삼는 말이 선우 인직된라 삼는 마다바 데 선우 인직된 깔바 찬제 정도 거든 다소 선우 인직된 탐지 차, 네, 예, 동조네. remji, ko tambo karba cha, deni karba ne, deni karba yek, deni karba tong. Deni paro dan lodang mambo ne kore. Sinu injiktin, tamji madabai rangi. Den dali jenje namda tibye nga so tata ha kondo yar, gun, so, tong chachang madabari ndo. 다 지간다 오데라 롱나원 탐지야 주는 자즈현 탐지 랑이 그 야칸분이 제네 갑설라 야가 메도 탐지 현단에 저 할레반라오단 직딘 라열레반남기 현칸레반남기 메도 제인데 동가데르르견데 메인로 거들어 된 jor도리 남다 되게라 삼는 저 마다바 동가데 가서 창마 뚫어다 현로 탐지 셀보리 메도 탐지 로차와리다 저랑게 냐라 외거는 냐라 세진 라가 말이 용도 거들이 코랑이 그거 동가 현로 셀보리 대하나 근처 세인데 되니 현로 탐지 챌린저 롱고 거 차바 차 때배 남기 조장 된다고 가서라 차근도 대인도 된다고 진짜 가서 마다바 차창데 대하나 이게 마다바리네 로고들 따바도 땡바 수적라 매와데 가서 하고 타바데 배 개진벌 다 마다바 찍고도 삼노 땅네 담부추양 담부추를 drama는 다 마다바 마검나 가리야 때 동하르 왔다 동하르 고향 가서 오 말이 마다바 마검나 가리 파 여기야나 가리 저 사년 현로 거나 거 남다 되게 간서나 and the four season and 영조 요리 다 들으리서나 파 여기 진데 다 들으 때라 가레나 티 맥롬 주뇽 때네 거데 파 여기야나 가리 때 가서 때 마다바 공고야 그 짐시 가레스나 두축은 때 가서 다 마다바데 담비추 드베치다 때 종주 마다바 그 종주见着 종주 출은 저把个 종주 讲着 讲真着 바정대 거는 작신 자고 된다고 가서 마다바 대연배 지던 가서 마다바 공고들이 대리 대인데 선은 직딩다 남다 되게라서 발사는 마다바 드르게 삼노동 거리 대 가서 대 마다바 임바데 드르게네 빼라 삼노당
As indispensable as the first contemplation of the four, the contemplation of the difficulty or rarity of acquisition of our current freedom and resources, as essential as this contemplation is, it is by itself not enough. We need to go further. Before going further, we need to ensure, however, that our contemplation of this topic in all its aspects has brought us certainty, certain belief. And this is not going to happen all at once. We need to train our minds in this first contemplation, as we also need to do with the other three, in a gradual process, starting with hearing or listening, acquiring the information, and then including both analysis, careful thinking about the information, and finally, actual contemplation or meditation. Just as the first contemplation is not enough, simply acquiring the information aspect of it, while necessary to begin, is also not enough. We need, if we're going to practice Dharma properly, we need to be able to depend and rely on ourselves. As long as we are dependent on others, it's a sign that our practice is still quite weak. Now, of course, we take refuge in the three jewels and we depend upon teachers and other practitioners. But finally, we have to live in the spirit of what is meant when it is said, you are your own protector, and also sometimes your own and only enemy. We have the capacity to protect ourselves and others from suffering. We also have the capacity, unfortunately, to cause ourselves endless trouble and suffering. So in order that we gain this independence, we need to contemplate the causes of this precious human birth, as well as analogies for it and the proportions, relative proportions of human beings to other beings. But certain belief in the preciousness of our human body, human birth, is not sufficient without a heartfelt appreciation of impermanence. Impermanence was described by the Buddha as the best of contemplations, and indeed, the impermanence of all composite things is the first of the four marks of the Buddhist view. Because impermanence is so important, there are many different formats for its presentation. Generally speaking, we are concerned in this contemplation with both the impermanence of all composite things in general, and especially with the impermanence and extreme fragility of human life. The fact is that our lives are no more stable and lasting than candles in the wind. As for a gradual presentation of impermanence, it can consist of various aspects, such as impermanence of the environment, impermanence of the inhabitants of our environment, the impermanence of even holy beings, the impermanence of all the plans and ambitions we come up with, the potentially infinite number of things that can cause our deaths, and the contemplation of the certainty that we are going to die. Impermanence in general, of course, is the impermanence of a composite. It's helpful for us to use vivid and readily accessible and observable examples of impermanence to gain our initial understanding of it. For example, in speaking of the environment, there are many, many cycles of impermanence to which we are subject. A world system, or any part of it, appears. Somehow it comes into existence. And then after it has come into existence, it remains for a while, millions or billions of years. And then eventually, it falls apart. It breaks down and is, again, over a long period of time, gradually destroyed. And then there is a fourth state where it's not there anymore. There's just nothing there wherever it was. If we look analogously at the seasons go through a corresponding process. During the spring, everything grows. During the summer, with the pleasant weather, beautiful flowers everywhere, it seems like heaven. But then, as beautiful and vivid as these flowers are, in the fall, they all die. Everything falls down off the trees, and the flowers wilt. And there is nothing you can do to keep those flowers alive. And then finally comes winter. Water turns to ice. The air becomes frigidly cold. The trees are completely bare. The leaves not only have fallen off the trees, but are liable to be covered by snow and ice. We cannot stop the passing of time. Therefore, we cannot stop the cycle, the movement of the seasons, any more than we can stop the decay of a world system. So we need to understand, by using the example of our external environment and the ceaseless march of time, we need to use this example to spur ourselves to diligence by reminding us that there is no time to waste. Now, this is if you want to practice Dharma. If you don't want to practice Dharma, there's no point in contemplating impermanence. I mean, you'll be aware of the seasons, the changing of the seasons, but there's no point morbidly obsessing with it or the passing of time, because it will just make you miserable. The contemplation of impermanence, death and change and impermanence, for someone who is not going to practice Dharma, is useless. All it will do is make that person more miserable than they would be anyway. It's much better just to take life as it comes. But for us, who seek to practice Dharma, the purpose of this contemplation is not to torment ourselves, make ourselves morbid or miserable. It is to remind ourselves constantly of the need to be diligent, to work hard, and not waste time.
All of the Tang also now you general the son of Matabala, some not on Yana, the Gini Chijamewa, Sujega la Mevari, Tenga Pinjula la Mevari, Tadonyan la Gamari, Jiwa Yunin Chua, Sayate, Rizalari. Teniko, Tendu, and also Jim Chakajun and Rogo. Garene, my Koban and my Chili, la co, walk jig jalon milling, Chakayori. Gare my Koban and Chakayori. Gare Dawa Kajan Tamni Chesebari. Gare lo Chin in Chesebari. Gare lo Jaresa Togolida, Jara Ina Togita, Savanin and Mary, Teniko Pachan Rokayori. Then the Chamogoli Suzayomari. Then the Tata Yangis are drinking on a long song yoro. Sa on the Torina. Gine Carezo Golirota Manchavarake. Ko Tendrikek and Chejamewake. The Care La Dewake. Sutega Mewa. Gina Lala Makiawa, Gagi Chujan Tom, Tucson, the Tesom Sas on the song. Then Gagi Rini Sayang, mention a Ladi or the reads or the Laju Yori, Sepa reads or the Chuga Tom Tubayuna, Chora there's a Tesom Yori. I did in Arachi in Chejamility, and some. Temato Jagata, Chamogoli, also Doboje Yomari. Chen the Lord Chia and Chat the Chunga Chat Savanin as of some Toma Hivari. Dinani Tata country here, Chijing immediately. Tendriki. Then the Nazo Dinani Tatalo Lotelang as of Matabala Samnotongana, Macazes and Rosan, Zambalan de Gantini. Tendri Samnotana, Tangazo Nam Chiru Higamarida. Togoma Nijuna Sani Lanjo Yomi Hakoya Yomari. There's a yearing body. Tata ngazo demand dini ya langjo yumi ha kokomari. Tundu mambo chando calling aso. Tundu ki matapara ke charge drum ne, then it chu drum na, then it chora yingter zawani in the mill chu drop tokeri. Then it chu madrop random da chan call it. Ha leba ke gets on the chimbo, chula chu draw chimbo. Matapa take chula donghate call mari. Matapa take chula devate call it. Caris and Arzo the chu give a dogoro. Nazo the Chiwa Jimani, Kazi Chiwa Solingo, Chiwa Yabolina, Yakarwa, the Reva Yorwa. They Menangazo Sanje Juna, Teleja Yakarwa, Chimchini, Jugomarwatini. Tenning on their Tanega Sozo Chiminum Zisa Sandrocoro, Chuyang Tabaki Dropsona, Tenny Kasa Traco Mare, Tragoya Mare, Trago Jimsia Yomare. Tendrika Nazola, Tenny Pao, Loco Chimbori, Chat Tabaki Gona, that Chuyang Tabaki Drop go already. Then the Tundrika Tony, then also Mataba, Yang the Sam, Yang the Sam. Kijik Samya, Yang Termeva, Yang the Sam, Mataba Sam. Tangazo, Lo Yombo Tamjik, Chejami Samki, Mambo Yori. Not the Lo Yombo and Tata Lo Chongchoin, and Chekami, Taron Lo Mambo and I should drop long you, drop con you. Kalekale Drokayan. 다당에 레가야 타규 존도네 베샤야 타규 조 데니 가랑 강바야 타규 자도네 모던데 밤저 야보로 올리빈네 데니 드츠레 가랑가랑네 트네 추드로게 산 삼노 땅키 요세바리 다테데 타렌타리 든르게 드츠 가솔란 용 시다메시 하고마리 진로 버튼 종네 셔커리 데인데 Tendrikela Samno Tone, Yani Yang the Lord Yang, then it should give out the drop tamna, then a young Pinto Chimbo and Yonko is also Semtol.
Dering also the island, the chairmanship law Jadang Dun. Yore. The Missy Badro. The name Casson are the Senator Chigi Ama. Lord Jadang Jet Lone Mo Shiwari. They draw They kedak changes. Karajini misibata ora.
Rawa.
Jala laksam de jute.
Re.
So that is the impermanence of the environment. And now let's look at beings. We have the concept of immortality, deathlessness, which is by which we mean that we think it might be possible for someone to be born and just never die. We entertain this concept in our fiction, and we dream about it. So it's like a fantasy we have. But that is all it is, because immortality is impossible. It is impossible for someone who is born to not die. What is possible is that death can occur at any time. You can die in your mother's womb. You can die a few months after your birth or a few years. And we generally regard it as extraordinary, indeed noteworthy, if someone makes it to 100. Or like Senator John McCain's mother, Roberta, who just passed away at the age of 108. And then there's a woman in Ireland I read today who's 107. But we talk about this because it's amazing. It's like, how can that be? Most people don't make it to 100. But what we have never seen or heard is somebody who doesn't and won't die. So in Dharma, it's often phrased as, have you ever seen or heard of an immortal person? Do you have any doubt about mortality? So the first thing about the impermanence of beings, the first thing to understand is, if you're born, you're going to die. Second thing is, you could die at any moment. Now, to think about this, to bring this home, it's again a good idea to use observable examples. Think about how many people you know who have died. Think about the age at which they died. Think about all the people you don't know but have heard about who have died since the beginning of human life. Try to imagine how many billions of people have died. Think about the number of people who have died from specific causes. For example, this year, this pandemic. Now, after thinking about how many people have died, then bring it back to yourself. And think about the fact that you have no idea how long you're going to live. We act often as though we assume that we're going to be around for a while. We have no right to that assumption. We assume that at the end of this session, we're going to be able to get up off our cushions and chairs and walk out of this room. But we have no idea. We could die right here, right now, at any moment. Every breath we take could be our last breath. And if we look at how many people we know who have died, sometimes suddenly, sometimes with some warning, who are our age or younger, we will take this to heart. Now, we don't contemplate the imminence of death in order to make ourselves miserable. It is not a morbid contemplation. A morbid contemplation is one that leads to nothing productive, that is simply self-perpetuating, like a loop. But the contemplation of impermanence is not that kind of contemplation. It's not a loop, because it leads to something. When we contemplate impermanence properly, taking it to heart, it causes us to engage in greater diligence in the practice of goodness and the practice of Dharma specifically. The more we practice, the happier we become. Therefore, the contemplation of death and impermanence does not contribute to or cause further misery for us. It actually becomes a cause of happiness. We become happy because we know that by leading a good life and practicing, we will have a better, higher rebirth next time. We may even have the ultimate assurance that we are going to achieve a Buddhahood. Certainty of a higher rebirth is an excellent cause of ongoing happiness. Certainty of the achievement of awakening is perhaps the greatest cause of happiness. In short, the contemplation of the imminence of death does not make us more fearful. It makes us braver. But for it to have this effect, we have to really take it to heart, and that is through repetition. We need to repeatedly, again and again, contemplate the death and impermanence. Now, when we're young, we tend to feel immortal. We assume, I'm young, I've got plenty of time. When we're young, because we don't feel mortal yet, we think, no, I'm young. First thing, I gotta make some money, then buy a house, and then, have fun, start a family, live a good life, and then when I'm older, then I can practice Dharma. Well, maybe. But who knows? Nobody knows. You don't know how long you're going to be alive. You have no basis for assuming that you are going to be alive tomorrow, let alone next year or 20 years from now.
All that's there. All that's all there. There na ye song or chid jib something na. Sanzam chayang sushi jis. There need the tandesa. Chibda dechi deta ne. Chini shima mayin sams. Ta chirani probon chira zugayonas. Chibda kinje dechin. Renamato Sani Hyasam Sukiris, Tereni, Tata Tereni, then the temperature doggles. That they so get take the so carries and also children job draw the yogori. Children tending on it and the Sinik, Teso on the Sinik, Janda, the Sinik, Decin Davote, Moman Davote, temperature reader, some nigga. They are called it Totanga so can de Chunyamisi in Gorwa. Tambo chuga loju ha ko chan da now Buddhist da tonda da ha ko sa ta nga so chula nyamli si ko ta nyamli si de tan da so ma da ba gom de twa yo ri ka ble yo ma ri la ji lo jang de san ke chik le yeng ru chi we de ja phor ba gan thong de se ri na san nga ran yen hyo din thong sa de din zola yi ka wa nga ran la yu chi gi san de lam sang sam no tong de sem na ni chu drop ji na sem ne chu drop ko ro chu sem go drop go ro de tak ta drop cho ko re te trin ki ba yu de gi ju ta ba o yo ba che si trin ki ba yu de gi ju dan tham na yen ka o ma re ma yin char de ni chu drop cho ro Then gom jan to chore. Jan thong you gom ja. Coffin thong you gom ja. Gomba po you gom ja chore. Gomba po you lo jang chore. Jan thong you lo jang chore. Then the new kick some no tong sana. Then to two the trula tanko marwa. They are not ying lobon the dog. Send the number long taba king. Choy chore jam matapa. Wo yo wo what need lo pale. Se come kangda ten ngom sar chi so. 소본 러럽지 송을 당가 솔레 소본 러럽 정러 왔다 소본 러럽 산지 니바다 러럽 러럽 라워데 다자 핀트다 거 진족 자알 핀트다 거 초도 저바 진종 초니 저 송이 번나니 소본데 로본 러럽 산지 혁자 더방에서 송은 로본 러럽 당가 솔라 디게 책든루 삼노다네 로장거 책든루 삼노다네 로장거 센드 누마 롱가 따바 초초르베 잠마다바我用我们就老把的社康讲到的那我们才去，我怕用我从我那里把那我做当时绕个有哈过嘛的，绕很多的，搞得绕多的，人那啥就哈着跟着这种，长嘛下上绕好的，我的车有个呢，我让个突出的东巴一个大拍人的车有呢，没忙不起老大把来个绕更多，我让个老穷干绕的个。치에서 나랑가 빠왔다 나랑가 아마 롬냐리딜 파차르데 다다 조찬도 데인데 삼노 휴게서 할래야 그냥 제조걸로 셈나 더소게 종주지 쟁도 큐르 드바게 제 조라고 삼노 땅 터건도 다데 히제데 가리리 혀는 저랑 그 주도 마데나 자하고 말이 가리 현도 그 하고 말이 가리 찐도 그 하고 말이 주도 마데나 주도 때나 당아 속에 뭐 희바 나니 같이 로차서 때 된달이 이제 니마르라 같이 로하리리 다다 든루 이게 삼노 동데 아예 당아지 집다 신질라나 조보면 다 조보래나 저랑 따롱 다 다주 공니송 송바나기 즉 머르레서 하다 주나 디팅 에양 삼네 대참 대 말이 찐이 정데 참진 척거와 대인도 세나 많이 저 조기 알라는데 아예 들은가 랑저다도 나고 힘도 와서네 샘나 좋아지 이마호서 원 설치되는 대로 amazing 저로 던지시네 야 조조부 도도네 다리가 추드버 고가로 양라도 선네 샘나 좋아지 거려 아가 랑토사우 마타 던가 갑레레 삼네 삼노 땅야 메레 람상 야니를 랑도네 데니 코랑 때 저래 로보 샘 니사나나 수차는 도네 데니 상조고 샘도 동니가 거라 삼노 때 자동 데니 소소가 커피 조 소소가 주바 향 칸도 조 샘 쪼아데 덴바고네 든르시네 데니 양레 가는 정네 야보로 든루 혀게 삼노 땅 탑고레 맞아 도고 마니드 사냥 가서 랑조 요 삼니 니트 요 말이다 니트 섭세라 요 말이 나라는 니트 미 라파르가 나니 창고 효견 통도 가서 이제 자원이 있는데 다롱아 대사랑 창고도 작간도 대인데 안 대사를 이제 세나 레로 대사를 제한도 나냥아 창고 통도 가서 할레바링아 로직런가 될라 그 산이 혀다 나니 혀 자원이니 섬 연령보 되게 차리견라고 자원이니 메와 차로 근도다 대나 다롱아서 다 나차 이렇게 된데 잭 가서라 마다바 유거컨도 원다 속에 다도서 조는 나서게 징이 조도 대조고라 추바조제 되게 징이 종치도네 징이 바데 조도 철절고로 다데 로존난 책난 샤사오로 징이데 게버 거마제선다 징이데 게버 조보제선다 된다리 진 도서라 삼노동네 추조고를 마도제게 여령보다 삼노 다 동야 미리 마다바 조 삼노동데 오 드르게 삼노동네 되는 가서 냠니르 조지나 데 할레바게 조토그리 데 다다 게피 다다에서 가담베 게비히니 탐지가 Chu dribjana Zochia, Jig Samno Tankoli, Jig the Caris and the Matapa in Sonkoli. Tambo Chulan Jobi, Part the Chuch Kurma, Tama Chuch Tenda or Carens and the Chuzojite, Zonda, Matapa in the Yen Son, George Yapse Tamjika, Nyamni Zose at the Matapari. Togonga Ma, Nyarkatela, Chatsama the Zamba Mato Yomar, that the Pula, Logi Zamba here, Yorimato, that Nasoka Kalanda, or the refuge, that Download book young to Yomari. That Zamba Tosar Ori and Zamba Tamjela, Zamba Poregan in the Sauna. That's a Zamba Yuna, Zamba, this our Kuma Yuna, one bag like this Zamba, the thing is enough for 1 month, some don't call it. 1 month, some not on the teen, I some not on San Yamnis holding us, so Puni retrieve Tamjik. Then he Kadamba Tamjik young daily Lona Tong call it. Gonda Zamba Yonsu Zoba the Surrey Manho, Porba Marka Bub. Tanga Sanyi Lanya Yuta Misu Hakor, Sanyi Lanya meaning on the Hechasaris. Become attachment is make a bother for me in practice and other deck parties of Islam. There's a master ho, sir ho, pa yadal ho, then a yoko. Takoki ya lang yuna, Tayan Zamba Song Chori, that Zamba Terrain Saji, Yang Song Gina, Naso Village and Road Zamba Song Jin, Terrain Saji Rakari. Ya decor. That true Sinyamnis in so Matapa Jang Yamnis in George Yapsek Terwata. Natso Gambo bag long da water ngaso kaju tanying maya teri. So thing also low young seria the Kadambani song ni, Georgie have sent my song ni. You are teri. Kaju no Gambo banda we're gonna capsa chu chingri zone. Kadamba and Yamni, Tambo over the con Kadamba Somari. Kadamba Tini Jin Malatin as Haja Chimbo Namjapa Chapari Mato Jakatambo Kadambari. Tela Tina capsa chu chingri zone song called. Kadamba Yamni zo the Nim Jong the Matabari, Tina and Matabari, Mataba Konala Samnotan Yoli, Georgie Yapse. Then the Tangaso Matapa, the chick some no tonsona, Halepa Yagetini, Chui Haboke, Tenin drum record.
It's been said that death is our constant companion. The Yama, the Lord of Death, is constantly with us, ready to take us at any time. We can never fool ourselves, or we must never fool ourselves with the thought, I probably won't die tomorrow. Who among us actually knows when we're going to die? None of us. Now, this may sound very, very gloomy, but in fact, it frees us from the basis of our fear and gloom. It's very simple. The cause of happiness is Dharma practice. The cause of authentic Dharma practice is the contemplation of impermanence. Since Dharma practice makes us happy and impermanence makes us practice, the contemplation of impermanence makes us happy. And we always have the opportunity to practice. The only thing that prevents us from Dharma practice is distraction. Distraction, of course, is a habit. What counteracts and can eventually eradicate the habit of distraction is the contemplation of impermanence. Because we allow ourselves to become distracted because we think it doesn't matter. We think that it's okay to be distracted. But when we allow ourselves to be distracted, we are robbing ourselves of that moment. That moment of distraction is lost and will never be regained. We cannot make time flow backwards. What this means is that since Dharma practice consists fundamentally of what you do with your mind, being undistracted with your mind, it's something that you can always do. The time it takes to drink a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or take a walk contains a large number of moments that can be used for Dharma practice. If you are undistracted while drinking your tea or your coffee, undistracted while taking your walk, that is practice. And that practice, that freedom from distraction, really comes from valuation, correct valuation of the moment. And that comes from recognition of impermanence. Arya Nagarjuna once wrote that our lives are like candles in a strong wind, more fragile, more ephemeral than even bubbles rising out of the surface of water. And therefore, if you think about it, the most amazing thing in all the world is when we take another breath. Because we have no reason to think that this breath is not going to be our last one. You can die very, very suddenly, such as from a heart attack or other causes. We have no way to know what's going to kill us. We have no way to know when it's going to kill us. Most of the people that I knew where I grew up, this of course is Lama talking, who are my age or older, are already dead. And I think this is likely to be true for so many of us. The problem is we're simply not paying attention. If we don't pay attention, we have no idea how many people are being born, how many people are dying, and so on. But if we pay attention, we have to ask ourselves the question, how many people that I used to know are dead now? If you understand how ephemeral, how fragile life is, you will be amazed every morning, amazed and delighted when you wake up. You will be so pleased to discover that you're still alive, that you'll be filled with energy. You won't be tempted to lie around in bed and think, should I get up now or later? You'll get up right away. With bodhicitta as your motivation, you'll make your coffee or whatever and start practicing, and then you'll go to work. Because you'll be enthusiastic about this extraordinary circumstance that you didn't die during the night. None of us should take that for granted. None of us know whether or not we are going to see tomorrow morning. Any and or all of us could very well be dead by then. I became very aware of this last year when my blood pressure shot up and I became very ill. Probably more aware of it then than I had been before, because I was close enough to death that I actually expected to die then. I thought it was more likely that I would die than that I would survive. In such circumstances, adversity that we cannot prevent, such as a health scare, becomes your friend. It becomes your friend because it reminds you, urges you, encourages you to practice Dharma. Someone whose awareness of impermanence is that strong will naturally have a great practice. In fact, the great masters of the early Kadampa tradition of Lord Atisha and his disciples emphasized, above all other practices, the cultivation of the determination to be free. And within that, they particularly emphasized the contemplation of impermanence, with sayings like, in the beginning, it is impermanence that brings us to Dharma. In the middle, it is impermanence that keeps us on the path. And in the end, it is impermanence that teaches us emptiness and brings us to realization. These early masters really lived this in their lives. For example, in Tibet, in past times especially, there was only one type of food, tsamba. And there was only one type of food storage, a bag. So most practitioners would probably try to store a bag of tsamba large enough to feed them for a month. And they use a little bit of it every day. But the great early Kadampa masters did not do this. Every night before going to sleep, they would offer whatever tsamba they had as a singed offering for pretas, beings in the bardo, and so forth. And then they would take the tsamba bowl that they would otherwise have used to eat it and turn it over. The reason they did this was because their thinking was as follows. Who knows if I'm going to live through the night? I don't. If I don't live through the night, and I keep this tsamba for my own use tomorrow, then my attachment to it and my stinginess will be obstacles to a higher rebirth. So I don't dare keep it. I simply don't dare. On the other hand, if I offer this tsamba to other beings, pretas, beings in the bardo, and so forth, and I die tonight, that will help me tremendously. So I don't dare not use that opportunity. So they would use up whatever tsampa they had as a sur or singed offering. And the next day, if they woke up, they would beg for more tsampa and do this every night. Now, their example is very precious to us, both in the Nyingma tradition and in the Dokpo Kaju, the lineage of Lord Gampopa. We treasure the Kadampa teachings on the determination to be free. And we follow their tradition of mind training because they specialized in this. They specialized in the understanding of impermanence and in using that to become truly determined to be free.
Di lob jong ko te ta te ri ge joji yap se ke lo sa nyam di zo ho de ten de example ro te ri ten de ta ge ki khara gom chong yen sa ge ki chik te phoba na na gom ja de example gom ja ne teni nyang ga yang sa la ma yong nyang ko la gom ja gong da ya phoba na de phoba go de ne chermang zo ne be sharp uniform or be 할레바 캬르가소는 데는도 데 케베 디아블로 현더 텐라고 철봉요 데 텔라콩 마로도 나브자데 텔라 쟁토 콩그진데 양때 사라 고효 데 야야가 다리가 양로한디 철봉등에 쭈게yen 삼삼노단데 야사 삼노 니방 코는데 난디 쭈도 롱나가 현로게 요간시 데베 게와 dom나 약사리 사 검자 도교데 야나나 야로도 쟁토데 양에 사냥된 아마 가텔은데 고요고요 삼 양코 고노니카와 향도 그 간히 대베 개와 점나가 삼 검자 상조상 검조교데 타마 철봉야 주고 말하네 공 상제네 고 디트와 톱스네 디트와 톱스네 대나게 든루 삼노도 검소나 되는 냠네 야버린도 그래 대나게 말아래 바게 ngaso lejimre la tsong se gona lejimre yang ta ba number ta ba he la samno tang so ne de yi chi che so de jep so mala re ban da wo wa de de khong song re nga cheben jeng ne ra la song si chimi cheben jeng ne ra la song si ta ko nam che chami sam ne ta cheben je kwa bor de ta chimi nyom zin sa sen song Tene kong namchanro samne ti gomjanja jamne to gongyang hyagari tadan hyagari sa gomjanja jamne namchi chami gomgomni tin chimi nyong tsinsa seng tan chejame wa ge tsinsa gare sena ta twa thap chare ne log tawa yang ta ba to cha tin chejo ma ta chimche ge dingsi din chale re jevin chikba yo ma re ko tene den ro chimi nyong tsinsa seng tan chevin jikba ngalami tan chevin jikba da toba ngalami twa tan re thab 다 던르위는 가서 그 줄들 이 드롭톱 거래 다 삼노 잭당이잖아 내가서 흰킨양 된다 드롭톱 거 말이다 다서 흰킨의 회사니 성알다다 하고 말이다 연하다 연동도위는 마 희거로 다 주흰킨저디 흰 연동도위는 마도 저거 소소라 던르게 그 삼노 땅토면도 사낭 독지다 잡등 망보 해세는 따오 망보 해세 디어 당한라나 다다 사닝 나닝 사낭 나낭존의 마도 제게 다다랑 아 인체적 삼노 동그 톱그 요마리 따모 망보 랭네 디어리 데인도 든르게 삼노리 마성와 토네 다 든르게 냠네르 제 조탐나 오네 트라네게 셈네 기보 차르 거들이 셈나 띵띵게 기보 차네 양니양도 곰 토바 양니양도 곰신 토바 마다바 줄이 께름견도 다 든르게 삼노 땅네 곰고들이 다 든르게 제나데
One of the most famous masters in the 11th century of Lord Atisha's early Kadampa tradition was Karak Gomchung, which means the young or little meditator of Karak. And he was also an early lineage holder of Vimalamitra's heart essence teachings on the great perfection. Now, Kara Gomchung, as one would infer from his being called meditator in his name, lived in a cave where he meditated. And he had to leave the cave, go to the bathroom, whatnot. And right outside the door or entrance to his cave, I mean, there wasn't really a door, but the entrance, was a very thorny tree, a kind of very thorny juniper tree. And we have trees like that here at KPL. So every time Kara Gomchung left or re-entered his cave, the thorns on the tree would tear threads off of his robe. And he would think, I really got to cut that tree down one day. But then the next moment, he would think, no, who knows if while I'm trying to cut the tree down, I just die myself, in which case that won't do any good. I better just forget it. And instead of cutting the tree down, spend the time it would take to do that meditating. So he never cut the tree down. And it's not reported how many robes he went through, but he never cut the tree down or tried to mitigate it in any way. And he achieved Buddhahood first, before cutting the tree. But he did so because of his awareness of death. Now, another equally famous example is Jetsu Milarepa, who in one of his songs said, I fled to these mountains in fear of death, thinking constantly, when will death come? But here, I've been brought to to realization beyond death, and now I have no fear of death at all. Milarepa was motivated to practice with incredible, truly peerless austerity through his fear of death and what might ensue after death. And as he practiced, he constantly reminded himself of the imminence of death and the fact that we know it's coming, but none of us know when. But because of his awareness of impermanence, he achieved a realization that transcends birth and therefore death. And therefore, having achieved that realization, as he sang, he was no longer afraid of death at all. We like to think of ourselves as people who believe in cause and result and live accordingly. If we actually believed in cause and result, we would live like Milarepa, because that's what people who really understand impermanence and causation do. We study impermanence, we may sort of contemplate it, but we don't really take it to heart, because we still plan. I still plan. I think about what I'm going to do tomorrow, what I'm going to do next month, what I might do next year, and so on. This is unrealistic. It's impractical. It would be much more realistic and much more practical and of much greater use for us to spend that time that we spend speculating about a possible future, to spend that time meditating on impermanence.
Hola, so Terry. Ta sinu jiktin da samna mataba gomje ta na ju jin ro da samna mataba gomje. Na ba nin ra wo shabdu song. 다 담배 집어서 싸우는 마다바 공고들 담배 집어서 싸우는 마다바 공도 간도 공고리시나 다 조부 산제 다자 조부 산제 혁자 터바스 시장부 섬치자니데 베지장부 집절라서 봐 제바케 던르케가다 오네베네 짐절라라만 탑딜이 던르케 소녀리 텐달리진 거로름보체 존에 다고 거로름보체 짐절라라만 탑살레 오리 텐달리진 자가 특히 자자다 핀럽 자자다 보게 텐달리 탑탑 자다 바보 보여라서 봐다 가지고 취다디선에 탑탑 담비 집어 ngaso tata marma taksam kaju marma taksam jesonda tendale chinje galope ta jeyapse som jesonda tendale chinje sachi koma nangwa jesonda tendale chinje ningma ge tata ta ko jiwa samje ma chapa longchi pa ta jingmi lingba ta tendale chinje mangbo ke son yori jagar tenda sonre pula tenda sonre parpola tenda sonre janala tenda sonre yana ya tambi chiwati tata yogde ba chang nga so gandi tso ge songri zole ma to yogde ba ke jikyang la mo mari di khaza ni nga so na za sab ge mo na yiri gang cha mo mari nga so 엄마에게는 가서 다다 착도를 또자 공부터 심부터 등주게 탑교하게 오늘 전에 리더리 근데 데라다고 자젤네 그 가야 매반다고 리더리 근데 등주게 담비지와 마보게 송요리데 다다 욕디 봐 아주 나와 저저거 다 나투 잠리 마도 저게 다다 욕디리 찍장 요 말이 근데 가서 삼는 동거리 당한테 차 요거는 나랑게 추추들이 라마 다다다 다 라기 나랑가미 라기 카트 다 로랭 보 체능 버린도 공기보 용도 마도 되지서 요 말이 차창 펩살이 차창 펩살 손살 다 대갑살랑 추추네 망보게 추추네 되어리 추추 다다장위 추추 년년장면의 추추 나님세변의 추추 추추 완추 콩나발의 갑레오 마는 나랑라 혐알의 갑레면의 콩나발 송킨의 갑레 자원이니 요 말이 던주wen의 추추들 개개들다 자원 다다 오 말이 요들 다 대나바게 송다와 다다 디 다감딘 콜론도 선는데 레자 투근다 마도 제게 요 말이 손살이 던르케리 담배 집어서 싸는 마다바제 삼노 땅야나 거로름 보진 코런제 짐방냥아도 간주 송어들이 너지 산지 기존의 간주도서 송어들이 고 프로도동게 야자 짐절은 오늘 라마 톱나 더서 톱되어리 마차삼의 댕우나 때때 담지 차창 하 송용네 잠리마도 제가 다 송사가 푸반들이 딘들이 콩가 나브잔들이 세칸다 존에 남큰 힘보사가 나브잔지 저때서리 마도 지금 인오 말이 이런 짐방냥 단데 게노 남큰 힘보데 콩가레 그 따르교나 콩가 욕차다 나브자다 다감다 사강 찬제 송 말이 차상 라되어리 대인된 자전도
에도 가봐요
카르쳐라리
카르쳐
로랑
로랑 카르쳐
리 차상지죠
자전도
어리 이전도 욕딩이 주때 자원이네 코코르게 욕디시 욕딩이 주때 거주 잠도 또 이전도
야
때레마도 저기 이요 말이 다다다 팹용리 졸마도 때레 가서 장복 장상다 우리 대카사 던저리 다다 나다게 기긴다 베거나 오네 추추디사 사자가 라마 제거리 네테 희안용 오네 전에게 캠볼로드스게 좀 캠볼로야 좀 다자마를 들을 차선이 더가 이기노게 콘 주주 사자리데 에나야 콘가 라마데 닝마 장장리데 되니 던르게 된 냠린 하레바게 zon키리 등아 콘데나 다왕아 잠도뇨 이제 대 주케데 되니 콘 마다발 하레바 옹가 냠니 zon로키리 콘그 역사를 지도 콘그 곰발라 다등아 소 감니 곰바 체큐리 자왕 압자 쪽자 저 체큐 대난 캠보 체큐 콘레 곤로 체큐 캠보 야큐 역사를 간저기 잡보고 포라나 이조진의 조초사래 콘레 역사를 탑차 강바 현강으로 탑차래 땡겨라 레발은 가서 그 레바전 보게 로그 parla zugale rewa zone tapcha rewa tendru ke tingjo ta nima tingdawo zokzo we na mele nia zoje mele ta tendru ke tapcha re ngor tene henga porpare kimba tongsa ke chabjire pipatre ta tema to khonele yomare zawani ni yomare teni khonele kor lorre gendala loma tamji de tamji ko kor pu ne te lorre khonake 차창만 밀라비는 다와르를 밀라비는 건가 짱마 짱장위는 건가 파티 지자 공발의 푸 라사라 다다 셈드게섬 데일은 지자 파푸는 다 코네 요사다 든루벤 다 사년 캬나 코네라 다 코네 나브자르 오리 다 잡반 토딜 잡반 망보 토딜 땡저르 나브자니 다 대니 사도 저리 마도 지가 사도 저런 강바티 나오마 다 든루 용도 거 대나바 탐제 펩차리 다다 요 말에 든주케리 다 담배 끼워서 싸우는 마다바 싸우는 너 두바리 휴나 다 든주케리 댕아서 가서 그 희견바리 다 가지고 말마 딱상도 간다타모 손도 다 대이 다다 혈잠을 가서 그 리마도 제게 손용내 돌마도 요 말이 대 대이라 싸움도 따는 가서 강요 말이 든주케는 담배 끼워서 싸우는 마다바 든주케 검나 달래 라원도
So those are how to contemplate the impermanence of the environment and the impermanence of its inhabitants, beings in general. A third topic worth contemplation is the impermanence of holy beings. Consider Buddha Shakyamuni. His physical form, we are told, was uniquely magnificent, endowed with 32 marks and 80 signs of physical perfection. His mind, well, he was the Buddha. He achieved complete freedom. And yet, even he appeared to pass away. The 84 Siddhas of India and countless other unnamed Indian siddhas, they appeared. They're all gone. In Tibet, famous lords Marpa, Milarepa, and Gampopa, the forefathers of the Kagyu tradition, they're gone. They were here, now they're gone. The great Dharma king, Lord Tsongkhapa, and his two closest disciples are gone. The 5 forefathers of the Sakya tradition, they're gone. Great masters of the Nyingma tradition, such as the omniscient Longchenpa, they're all gone. All of the holy beings who appeared in India, in Tibet, in Nepal, in China, and in other countries, they're all gone. None of them are around. Among my own teachers with whom I studied back home, only my grandfather, Karma Tupten, is still alive. And that's because he's very long-lived. All of these masters with whom I studied, and I have no doubt that passing away was no source of difficulty for them, but they're all, other than my grandfather, they're all gone. Certainly, Guru Rinpoche achieved the transcendence of birth and death. But where is he? He seems to be gone. The 25 or 27 disciples, including Nupchen Sonje Yeshe, they're gone. Their nests are empty. For example, in southern Tibet, in a place called Kartru, in the province of Lodrak, we have the cave where Nup Nanke Nyingpo practiced. We have some of his robes, his cloak, and his seat. Those things are kept there. They've been there for 1,200 years. But that's all. He's gone. One of my teachers was a renowned abbot of the Sakya tradition called Khenpo Lodro Sengye. And although he himself was Sakya, somehow most of his gurus were Nyingma, such as Topgyal Yujin Norbu. And I studied before him in his presence for 5 months. Now, his monastery was one of the biggest, most prominent in my part of eastern Tibet. It had between 500 and 600 monks. It was prosperous enough that he, as its principal abbot, could well have afforded to build himself a fairly fancy, well, even palatial residence. But he never did. All he had was a rough rug made from felt, woven from yak hair. He had one wooden bowl. He had a pea pot in a piss pot, a pot for urination. That's when they're not talking about beer or tough guys, they're talking about piss pots in this story. And he received offerings, and he would divest himself completely of everything down to the last penny and piece of goods, at least every year and often every month, donating all of this to other monasteries, such as the great seats in central Tibet and so forth. What he left behind was the robes that he wore. And since he wore them all the time, they're pretty stained. They're pretty grimy. He's gone. All we have are the robes, the stained robes that he left. We need to think, if persons such as that die, why do I dare to think that I might not?
All that's. Oh, they damn kill son of Mataban or duty. Tanga so Dako Mambo Yori, the Tapedon Nazola son of Matabare, Tony, the Sekaya Tenita, he's a Hisavena to Zosari. That in the Tapedon Nazola son of Mataba Seria de Cortella. Tangazo Nazope Nazogoni Dani Jata Ni Matabari, Taba Yomari. Tendra the change, Tan Tagiduba Mataba Zelanda, Dupantama Tar, Sabantama, Si, Tovantama, Tong, Ta Pombotamgia Matabari, Talo Pomboyana, Sana Yobol and Jolly of Nipa Yomari, Matabari, Sopo Tangbol and Jolly. Nipa Yomari, Trambo Sobo and Jolly, Nipa Yomari. Nani Soboyena, Tata Trambo, Talaga Trambo Yana, Lojimanani Sobori de Yohimari, that Tendrika Matabari. Tako Nazo, Dipantama Tara Seriate, Sun Nazo Tata Sun Ducoli, he Tatenda change Tapat in the tongue. Tintani part Targoli, Cas Hosone. Kijik Tini Lam, Mataba Chat salary. They are not yellow jebag songery. Tata Tampe Chang or Takashi Tozanda, the two thought the Mundra, Chunin do it and Davrangi, Zesonda. zambo nemar data tuta the mandar nyanyin do chang dabarngi jason de chi nemar dala ta tendri ke mata pa chang ja song yang gor ori ta nga lo tri ma song ten dal de change mata pa ha koya o mari ten de nga zo pa ta ma ke teng ba la song ori za chang mata chong dun rong bo da domi Kunzang ma zi teng ba song za chang yin na mata pa 다바 자원이 요.
돈 짐바마지 좀.
건전 세야 마. 등러봐 손네. 탕마 마다바리.
여보. 바담바기 송데 케차다 딩리 자자.
딩리 자자나.
딩리 자자 나 케차 못 손도.
데텐데. 대한항기리. 대한항기가 다다 가서 송요로와 ngazo ngoma song yore dani yang mata pare data ni den jor separe ni da ran jor separe tate ngazo tata nguyu ne chak to ne ha ko ko yore ko gang gang o mare dani mata pare changma mata pare ma ta ba de ten ba yo mare ten de ze tham je mata ba se ya de te ten de ta ngazo song do nga jung pa pa ka da ya song nyo la phe ne kap sala 지미르게 버거를 빵나 야 대버거데 빼제와 쳔버리 가 버거리 냐샤리사 너한테네 쳐르고 다 버거 쳐리 마도 저건데네 서자기 쳐다오 말이 버거 되게 자리다 버거 대
버거 말이
자가네 리 냐샤사 자가리 잡으니 자 냐샤 간사죠 다부 자가다 버데 쳐텔라 때서 살로 요요 코사로 냐샤사 되니 냐이 로바데 청헐람피 데 쳐게사 쳐텔라 다로 도정자 다 든루베 데요 파파 까다야 소녀라 팸니까서 소녀성의 고하라 팸데 데 ngong히긴 친손들이 잭자인데 데 파샤사히 말라데송 베 버거데 그마 담을 잡어를 뭐 수르게 잡어 디 되게 수린되게 시지 뭐라나 버거 제와라네 냐데 뭐라 파기 제왕아마 파리인다 파디 샤사디어레 마데 쳔모데 제왕아마 마글리리도레 말라 댕도 거 다노 로바든피 파샤사히 말라 댕 총미 초에 로바차 총마게 초에 로바사하레 고 모게 고 게보게 로바사하레 담을 잡어 빵라종 코르추라 게모토스 베 코라세야데 할레바리 게모효리아린도스 더 다니라 던드케리 마다바리 간드게게 제와린도 간드게린도 때라 쩨쩨는 콘젠세야 요마리 콘젠세야 된다가게니 당가게 드라예 다 소리세야 요마리 드라다니는 저세바리 니데 자드라는 저세바리 따따 가소 그네당 데 가소라 다다 종도 종경바 샤사 리코리 가소 창마가 가소 치사다리 데 된다데 망이바리 배동 나조르사는 마다바 곰바 손네 든드케라 띠는 마다바 양데 곰나 야보레 데소게 핀토거리 야시 다니 차당 신도 고야게 짐심도시 덩아랑게 효에 덩아랑게 효메 덩아 녀소에 덩아 녀소메 콩알 야보야 세컨도 콩아 갑소에 콩알 데자 세컨도 콩아 잡소에 ring소에 된다는 예랑 세고야 말 녀마질라 추 ring버소데 추 녀와리데 유히 말이 녀버소데 추 ring와리소 유히 말이 띵띵 요 말이 창만 마다바리 된데 든두케라 다삼노 땅의 로자 양소나 되니 산조 선바 차크리아 갈래 산조 선바 녀랑 속차다 저러 산조 선바서야데 차르거 된데 설레나 니저 요 말이 산네 창마를 되니 가서 띵띵 요 말이 땡땡면 마다바인데 창마를 때니 가서게 직관하고 차로 걸에 될 때니 추점데 직관하고 때 마다바레와데 따방하게 녀소데 녀소리요 마 잡소리요 말이 땡데 든두케게 토니 삼노 잭땅 베데 돈의 자 돈의 냠슬린 다 피는 말이 베 직보 때는 카펜라고 가서게 모빈라고 때 때바나게 베차토라 잭다 어떤 센도 로지 든두 정용을라 살리 스토리라고라글라 파차 야절마야바 오 때때 대하나게 공하게 셈줄로 처jar 카 난도 로젠도 카 난도로는 셈줄이 전 되는 냠네 잭조기지나 the call let on our same the corner, you don't talk all it. That the new check Madaba getting as all the Yamlin, the pink talk all the attended, the new check some time, and pink or some.
So that was a very brief presentation of the impermanence of holy beings. The next step in the contemplation of impermanence is looking at impermanence from different angles, which means looking at different common examples of impermanence. Basically, the point here is that nothing stays the same. Enemies can become friends. Gatherings are eventually dispersed. Rulers and governments can change and fall. The rich can become poor and the poor rich. Meeting or gathering always ends in parting. Building always ends in destruction. Accumulation always ends in loss. And birth always ends in death. In one of his songs concerning impermanence, the omniscient Longchenpa says, no matter how good your friendship with someone may be, you will eventually be without them. Another similar saying is attributed to Padampa Sanjay, the Indian Mahasiddha who visited Tibet several times. And he gave 100 pieces of advice to the inhabitants of a village called Dingri. So it's called the Dingri 100. And in one of these, he says, I don't know why I find it funny, but it says, people of Dingri, marriage is really no more lasting than two people happening to stay overnight in the same inn. So don't hold grudges. Don't hold grudges. Because you're not going to be together that long. There's no point in spending your time holding a grudge. An equally, perhaps even more famous a story concerning impermanence is about one of the Buddha's disciples named Katyayana. And Katyayana, by this point, had become an arhat. So he had remarkable direct knowledge or supercognition. On his begging rounds, he came across a woman sitting on her front stoop, or the door threshold, holding her baby child in her lap. She was eating a fish and feeding some of it to the child. A dog, a seemingly wild dog, or maybe it was hers, but it lived outside the house anyway, was trying to grab the bones of the fish from her, and she was kicking the dog to keep it away. When he saw this, Katyayana said, eating her father's flesh, kicking her mother, and feeding her father to her worst enemy, samsara is funny. What amused him was that The woman's father had died and had been reborn as the fish that she was eating and feeding to her son. Her mother had died and had been reborn as the dog. And her family's worst enemy, her worst enemy and the father's worst enemy, had been reborn as her baby son. So seeing how much the relationships had changed so quickly, Katyayana found this amusing. If you think about this, how much things change, you really won't hold grudges. You won't invest yourself too much in attachment and aversion, in categorization such as us and them, my side versus their side. Because people change sides. Friends become enemies, enemies become friends, and it's all so mutable, so constantly changing. And this brings us to another benefit of the contemplation of impermanence. Not only does it spur us to greater diligence, but it also teaches us impartiality. It is through the contemplation of impermanence, among other things, that one can become a truly impartial bodhisattva. We need to understand that the situations we experience and see around us are no more real or lasting than the story in a movie we might happen to see. But we need to apply this understanding of the ephemeral nature or the transitory nature of circumstances in our minds.
la tata pedon na so la san mata ba he ya ti kor te ke ta jani ya mata ba rin do san ni ke sam no chen khon ro du ne tata ko ni hyo ba na gi ri jani sok cha ta tra ba de ni ni ne hin cha khyo chen bo me wa chang ro ko le ta nga so hin cha de la de ne hin ba de la de ne dong har den jong ko ro dong har jong sa de nga so zo de hin cha ri 자니니라 차당 때는 다 동하는 정거들 대나는 대사 동하는 정거 말이 니나 hin차 혁침보지에서는 다 동할 체크되대 지마증 잘렌다 지마 대게 저라나 독자 랍렌다 세나 교란 그배 혁침보텔라 현바 hin차 세겨라 대게 동할 줌 타바를 라미 세컨도 마마모 소소 조보 물리데 메라미네 조 혁역근도 라히 자탑 다 디동 할 때를 되는 좀 커와 가서 마다 봐인 받은 거 없이 디동 할다 대행도 걸어 봐 샘나네 대행차대 파 행로도 근데 샘나 대지제 잼 걸어 라인 샘 코란 거 제와 거 와 린지지 제와 거 샘 코란 거 린지지 대와 거 대지 거 대 가서 그 동할 주자죠 가서 그 제와데 매와서 저거 걸어 대 가서 그 혁침보야 램도 대니 잔이 차당도 파타 땅형리 대니 니나 신차 대사 매와 대니 가신 라면다 소소 그 잔인다 오 조보 조몬다 오 단라면다 차나 신차 대사 요말 야 르엔 너 마다바르 와스 따바 강오 말이 신직디 카타니 마다바란 기리스 대고 저저라 제와 혁침보 파트야리 마도 저게 저저라 라 세크 말이라지 가시 던저 정시나 오 내가 마다바레 와서 또 던저히가 동하르데 나랑 샘나데 나가 동하르데 스타트함나 디 동하르데 나가 동하르데 스타트함데 샘텔 데지 정도 디샘 데지데 제와데라 데지데 그 누바데게 예나 데와테 타고로 데 마토니 소소라 담보 데와레 데지레 데 마탐나 파로포 예나 데와테 고나 테르조 마리 자와니니 요 마리 대인도 담보 소소람 토 요거라 카 나한테로는 냠네세 망가르게 상고려
코랑 냠니 세고리 코랑 냠니 세게 자자도 코랑 단전 효kim보다 삼거리 세바리 데마리 당보 나랑 냠니 존도 말티니 파데와 되거로 당보 나랑 냠니 촌니 칼라미나 말 칼라테야 라가 말어 당보 나랑 셈텔 데지데 데 제와데 또바데 남파와 이게 토니 심지기나 바버티 터거로 राना वांद दुने यिना सर्ज नों करो यिना सर्ज नों जो फरब छोको वांद दया के जा मारे फरब देची टे थबक के जा रे सांजो संबातम जी राना तांबो वांद द करो राना वांद दमा दन यिन ना वा सर्ज कांड नि थब गोले यो मारे जमारे सेया यो मारे ते लाओ रे आते पेना को मालादमा का पचो के चना मोरा लापा में साथ पलिन जी नुपाओ मारवा ते ना गिरी ते तांबो ngaran के तुरु ये के लो जांग दे रंबा yang de लो जांग दे तेंदी तसो छामा ते तोंदा दे हाजे कोंड मदा बा के हा कोंड तेंदी जानी छादां द जक जान दे छामा न जेवा दे छामा मदा बा यंबा दे ngो de जे हिन दे Teni ngavi the ngarang la power left cord, yamning a power. Ngarang and yamning a power at the lamb do, yin latin, ngavi, ta pinta tagoro. That teria. They in the gypsum malaria baka marpalos or sonro. Te cornel power candle, lama la sanjing with some tongue, roller simjila, pamagas, sambada zewani, clean check the young cord, teni. Then the malaria bag, so much on 2 9 on the Namki Choran Paging ala Sanjing within the Hita, Raw Simji Tamjila, market Soso market Zewakanyo Banagi, Chatabare, Ningerilla, Taco, Tepare, Ninjin, Linjek, the Tunyanjik, Jeonga, the capsule in the Choran Soba on the doing Sonro. That then I get my third part of Soba Jang, Tanga, Nanda, get that here can do under the say, your Mari. Jerdan, and I touch a condu. ngazo zondo ro ma to te den de te ke do win the sen lo jang lo jong zo lo jong de pe ke chen bo den ri ke ma da ba ke lo jang ya de ta ke chen bo ri
the jisin mela ke nyame kampo pa la song ba re to
te re la
The contemplation of impermanence in different instances, using different examples, such as the transformation of friends into enemies and enemies into friends, is very conducive to happiness. Because through contemplating the mutability of these categories or labels, our anger toward those we think of as enemies and our attachment toward those we think of as friends will decrease. As a result, we will suffer less. Anger makes us miserable. You cannot be happy while angry. Attachment makes us even more miserable. Because when we're attached to someone, we fear losing them so much that even before losing them, we don't enjoy being around them. We're miserable because we're afraid. We have become disempowered by our fear. And we see this in cases where people are so attached to other people that in case of loss or breakup, they'll even commit suicide. That's the type of suffering that attachment can produce. And all of this intense hatred that we seem to bear those we think of as enemies, and intense attachment that we bear toward those we think of as loved ones, all of this comes from failure to recognize and keep in mind impermanence. There's a great deal of difference between attachment and love. If you are free from that kind of attachment that makes you live in fear, you will be much more loving. And obviously, if you are free from anger, you will be much more loving. And that kind of loving kindness is the opposite of attachment. Because rather than being a state of fear, a state of misery, it is a state of happiness. Partly because it is innate to all of us. It is natural for us, deep down, to be that way. So, when we become free from anger and attachment, we gain perspective. And that perspective reduces and eventually eliminates our suffering. The happiness that that perspective brings us makes us powerful. It makes us actually powerful enough to help others. Now, some people look at spiritual practice as some kind of selfish indulgence. Some people look at somebody who meditates for many hours a day as someone selfish. They're doing something that's only for their own good, only for the point of their own happiness. That's incorrect. If we meditate with the right motivation, we are practicing so that we be able to help others, really help others in the sense of giving beings true happiness. But we cannot give what we don't have. We cannot give other beings happiness as long as we are still miserable. A miserable, fearful person cannot give happiness to others that they themselves have not yet achieved. You may want to, but you won't be able to do it. You'll feel completely impotent, completely powerless, like a mother with no hands who sees her child drowning in a river but cannot rescue him. So, the contemplation of impermanence gives you power. It gives you the power that attachment and aversion would otherwise take from you. And this requires practice. At their last meeting, Lord Gampopa asked his teacher, Jitsun Milarepa, at what point in the future it would be appropriate for him to accept disciples. Milarepa said, at some point in the years to come, you will have a perception of this old man, Milarepa speaking of himself, that's utterly unlike how you see me now. You will see me as a perfect Buddha, and you will see all beings with the love that a mother has for her own children. Those two events or transformations will be the sign that it is at that point fit for you to accept disciples. So, briefly put, it is extremely important that we train our minds, and among mind training methods, of utmost importance, that we contemplate impermanence.
어때? 다들 치징이 받았었는 마다바레 도르드르 켜야인. 단 치징이 받았었는 마다바스야 된가 저다 고사사리 당가선 디 롱바 다다게 뜻으라 망체교 하고리. 치징이 받았었는 마다바스야 된가선 쳬비진의 현도망, 소비진의 현도뇨, 대외 쳬비진의 요성. 롱호리 나디 롱데 바잔 도롱랭서 Then the Nazo Tata accident Chana Kazi, Chivichi Mambori. Pizza says Yapo, Sayata Jungazo, Pizza cheat, Lun Sovichit says, said the Tongan Journal, Loja Shakayori. Chivichi Shadaneja Mambori. Then the change Trango in Jar, Tratoni Long Mambo Shakari. Modata, Damtro in the Tendra change Haleba Shanokando, Nazo Tata, Titsundala. Haleba Manche, the Modak Damtro in the Shako, and also Pie in the Tata. The Modata, he make it drink Yabo, Mason Yabo, me, the Quachatan, the Passe, you call it, Tendravin. Then Chivichi, the Chandaneja, Sani Vin, Samag Nang, Loja Shakayori. Then the Pinzak means and mean the Torin, Nasa Gimbajana, Shakayori. The cook, Jin Chandaneja Mamboring, also Chivichi. 하자망보리 따땡아 속은 치살다들이 데이터 이제 초비진서야 하자내자 용용로리 데는 치비진 치진 이바를 싸는 마다바선 치진 이미 남치 가는치 초 간르스니시 나랑 이사는 대우위 셔서 민간나 셔커여서 담초위는 셔커여서 다른 처지는 러번다와 처지야 지는 셔커여서 자란적인 셔커여서 행동의 차는 셔커여서 토간의 long 셔커여서 또 자원인이 하고만 지망버리 근데 든두힐 삼노단의 소소하고 말이 삼네 단 노른다 단도 설제되나 청이바인 삼네게 다 타추거들 쳐져예 청이바인 띵띵아 쳐져예 삼네 삼노단 거 무슨 안초 르연랭보 dunkin예 쳐져 매와 그면 지민 자 소 톱선에 던저些个没人实在了领导找吧些个没人俺学着没学个没学经验写啥个没出地个国才讲啥呢得有哈来吧人刘江写个有恰场啊个做个有俺学个没打了老张忙不都个人上那个早晚年的上东亚没的他去着的学着人学你把钱上学难学定的哈么上那个等着些个定期定的等着些个他怕就的呢等你打去找过来等着些个他就那样东哈边呢早讲的讲过嘛的学你这要嘛的哎那等着些个他的去从呢去找把个家真着不去找把个宗旨被宗旨全部diligent来搞的等你这个去找上这个你把这个等你偏头全部用着过的三块了等你他都就这么拉来把个在里那里吃下东下个人上个上么当个了他呢等你前面用么真是三着搞的这讲我嘛的等你他怕当把个送带的吃完嘛人的남자 상총 제바 인等你过这个吃完嘛的남자 상총节的他餐人吃完嘛人남자 상총 제바 인等这些个定期马定就把的단 도나 냠니 세야리 오야다 되니 마다바데 드네요 되니 저반다오비 저저저
저저저게라
저저저게
다 저저저게라 맞잖아 저저만 자에 때요 말이 fear of death The next topic within the contemplation of impermanence is the contemplation of how many circumstances can cause one's death. To explain this briefly, first, there are obvious causes of death that we all know about. But then the things that we think of as life support, resources that keep us alive, can also become causes of death. In other words, we're not always killed by things that are always causes of death. We're often killed by things that we think of as supporting life. When food, which we depend on in order to live, goes bad and becomes poisonous, that can kill us. We have cars in order to make our lives better, get from one place to another more quickly. But how many people die yearly in auto accidents? We don't build cars so that they can be used to kill people. We don't buy them for that purpose, but they often do. Food can kill us. Medicine can kill us. We don't take medicine in order to die. We take medicine in order to live. But medicine can kill us, can become poisonous. There are so many ways we can die unexpectedly. We can choke on our food, even if there's nothing wrong with the food. If it goes down the wrong way, we can choke and die. We can go for a swim and drown. We can go rock climbing, fall off a cliff to our deaths. We can be sweeping leaves off our roof, fall off that to our death. We can be walking or sitting under a tree, and the tree can fall on us and kill us. So there are so many, really countless possible ways we could die. We should know this. We should know that we know for sure we're going to die. We don't know when, and we don't know how. So we know one thing and don't know the other two. We should take this into consideration, and yet we don't. We always think that we're different, that I am going to beat the system. I'm going to beat the odds. Other people die. Other people will die, but not me. I'm not going to die because I'm in control. I am in control of my life. I eat the right food. I get lots of exercise. I do things to relieve stress. I won't get sick. I won't die. Nothing's going to happen to me. That's how we think. We may not believe it conceptually, but emotionally, we do. We must not think that way. Somewhat ironically, but very fortunately, the fear of death will free us from the fear of death. Like Milarepa, who did what he did, initially motivated by the fear of death and what would follow it, and motivated so strongly by that, he achieved a state beyond all fear of anything, including death. A state where death itself, it was no longer anything to be afraid of. As he and others have put it, for a yogi, death is not death. It is an opportunity for awakening. Oh yeah.
Okay, time's gone. Sorry, no more have question and answer today. Tomorrow we will see. I think so. Tomorrow we have leftover some evening.
If we're
For-
alive.
If we're alive. Yeah, that's right. Lots. They're around you. Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Sonande tamji zibani domna nibe dana banzi Chega nanje bala droba Zolen rowa yo gewa de jewo ga zona yige zozo de zona yige lezan Tamba gönye doba yo zanjo semne rambo je maji bana je Jiba nyamba meba da kone kond pewa yo semje tamje deda denjara je ngendo tamje tata tongbarai Sanjo samba kanda zargyo ba deda ganj molan raba yo sanje renje zeze tambe ka jargan de ya danda lengba Sabje mezon reve sanga je sige zonda jabe Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Hope see you tomorrow.